Let's start with a premise most people find uncomfortable. Your salary didn't stagnate because your employer undervalued you. It stagnated because your employer correctly assessed it didn't need to pay you more. That's not cynical. That's just how labor pricing works. Companies are not in the business of paying what you deserve. They're in the business of paying what it takes to keep you. And for a lot of people, that number is lower than it should be because they've never seriously tested it. This video is about understanding that mechanism and changing it. The first thing to get clear on is this: salary is a pricing problem, not a performance problem. Most people treat it as a performance problem. They think if they work harder, document better, and present their accomplishments more convincingly at review time, the number will move. Some of the time it moves slightly. Most of the time it doesn't. The reason isn't that their employer is ungrateful. It's that the inputs to compensation decisions are almost entirely structural, and performance is a minor variable in a model that mostly runs on bands and replacement costs. Here's the myth that needs dismantling first: the idea that consistent, strong performance eventually produces meaningful salary growth. It doesn't. Think about the highest performers you've worked with. How many of them got genuinely significant raises without either changing companies or leveraging a competing offer? Probably not many. And the people who did get large raises, what happened just before that conversation? Almost always, they'd been interviewing. The pattern is consistent enough that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Performance is a condition for staying employed. It's not the mechanism for getting paid more. So how do companies actually set pay? There are two main inputs. The first is the salary band, the range associated with the title and level of your role. Every company, whether they admit it or not, has a structure like this. You're somewhere in that range, and the range has a ceiling. The second input is replacement cost. Roughly, how hard would it be to find someone to do your job at your current salary? If the answer is pretty easy, there are lots of people with your skill set, then your compensation ceiling is lower than you'd like. These two numbers, not your output, set the frame for what's possible. Let's talk about salary bands in more detail because most people don't know they exist, let alone where they sit within one. A band is a minimum and maximum for a given role, say £45,000 to £65,000 for a senior analyst. When you join at the bottom of the band, there's room to grow. When you've been in the role for 3 or 4 years and had 3 or 4 raises, you may be at or near the top. At that point, annual reviews can't move you further because the band won't allow it. The only way out is a promotion to the next band, a role change, or leaving. Most people in this situation keep pushing on annual reviews without realizing the band is the constraint, not their performance. Replacement cost is the number HR actually cares about. Not what your work is worth in some abstract sense, but what it would cost to post the role, interview candidates, hire someone, onboard them, wait 6 months for them to be productive, and absorb the risk of a bad hire. For common roles with deep candidate pools, that cost might be 3 to 6 months of salary. For specialist roles, it could be much higher. The further above that cost your salary is, the more leverage you have. The closer to it you are, the less. This is why specialists and people with rare technical skills have more negotiating room. The replacement cost is genuinely high, and the employer knows it. Here's a concept that doesn't get enough attention. The first number you negotiate compounds forever. Not literally, but practically yes. When you accept a role, every subsequent offer is partly anchored to your employment history. Recruiters ask what you're currently making. Internal promotions reference your existing base. A candidate who negotiated hard at entry and landed $15,000 above the initial offer carries that advantage forward across their career. The person who took the first offer at 25 is, in a very real sense, still paying for that decision at 35. This is why the negotiation at the point of offer is disproportionately important. It's not just that job. It's the multiplier on everything after it. Now here's the part most people find genuinely uncomfortable. Every year you stay in a role without testing the market, you're sending a signal. Not explicitly, you don't say anything, you just stay. But to your employer, staying without an outside offer is equivalent to saying, the current compensation is sufficient. The employer updates its model accordingly. It doesn't mean you're happy or that you think you're fairly paid. It means you haven't generated the conditions under which paying you more becomes necessary. This is not something that happens to you. You participate in it. The good news is that participating differently is a decision you can make, and it doesn't require being mercenary about it. There's another factor most people don't consider: employer-perceived searchability. Your employer has a rough model of how easily you could leave. Not from data, but from observation. Is your LinkedIn profile active? Are you posting, getting recruiter messages, connecting with people outside the company? Do your skills appear to be current and in demand? Or has your profile been static for 3 years? Your skills are specific to the company's internal systems, and your network is mostly colleagues? Employers sense all of this, and it shapes how they treat compensation at renewal time. A person who looks searchable is treated differently to one who looks locked in. It's not always conscious on either side, but the pattern is real. So what actually moves salary meaningfully? There are exactly 3 mechanisms worth understanding. The first is a genuine outside offer. The second is a role change, which can happen at the same company or elsewhere. The third is skill scarcity, being one of very few people who can do a specific thing well. Everything else, performance reviews, tenure, loyalty conversations, asking for more, produces noise around the margins. You might get a slightly larger band increase. You will not get a structural step change. Understanding this is liberating, because it means you can stop spending energy on levers that don't work and focus on the ones that do. Let's go deeper on outside offers, because they're the most powerful of the 3 and the most misunderstood. An outside offer doesn't work because it's a threat. It works because it's information. It tells your employer that the market has priced you at a specific number and that you have a real, time-bound decision to make. That changes the conversation entirely. HR can argue with a feeling, "We don't think you're being underpaid," but they can't argue with a number that has a deadline attached to it. The replacement cost calculus becomes immediate rather than theoretical. That's what breaks the inertia. The offer doesn't have to be one you're planning to take, but it has to be real, a real process, a real number, a real decision. The practical implication of this is that you should be in the market regularly, not frantically, not every 6 months, but consistently. A useful rule of thumb: 1 serious interview process per year. Not applying to every role you see. 1 actual process where you go through multiple rounds and get a real sense of what the market pays for your skills right now. This does several things simultaneously. It keeps your resume current. It keeps your interview skills sharp. It gives you data, real market data, not salary surveys, about what your role commands. And it keeps your network alive. Most of the best opportunities never reach a job board. They come through someone who knows someone who remembered you're open to the right thing. Role change at the same company is underused as a lever. Most people think about compensation as a function of their current role, and within that constraint, their options are limited. But moving into a different role, even laterally, can create a legitimate structural reason for a compensation reset that pure performance discussions rarely do. A shift from a commodity function into a critical one. A transfer from a support role into a revenue-generating team. A move into a more senior title that opens a different salary band. Companies are often more willing to pay market rate for a new hire, even an internal one, than to admit they've been underpaying someone in their existing role. The psychology around this is real, and you can use it. Skill scarcity is the long game, and it's the most durable form of compensation leverage. Being the only person in your team who genuinely understands a critical system, or being deeply skilled at something few people can do well, changes the replacement cost calculation significantly. But there's an important distinction here. Accumulating years of experience in one area is not the same as building scarcity. If you've spent 5 years deepening expertise in a specific platform that's becoming less relevant, you haven't built scarcity. You've built depth in a shrinking asset. Scarcity requires deliberate investment in the right direction. What is genuinely hard to find, likely to remain important, and where your background gives you an edge. One of the concepts in the original article that's worth dwelling on is the difference between loyalty and inertia. Staying at a company because you're learning, growing, being well managed, and being compensated fairly. That's a rational, legitimate choice. Staying because leaving feels complicated, because you're not sure what you'd make elsewhere, because you're hoping someone will eventually notice. That's not loyalty. That's inertia sustained by uncertainty. The two feel identical from the inside, which is why it's worth asking the question honestly. If you knew exactly what the market would pay for your skills tomorrow, and exactly how long it would take to find something better, would you still stay? The answer to that question tells you a lot. What does a healthy external-facing professional identity actually look like in practice? It doesn't mean being on every platform or posting constantly. It means being findable, having a clear, current, external representation of who you are professionally and what you're good at. It means having relationships outside your current employer, people who would think of you when something relevant crosses their desk. It means being visible enough that recruiters can reach you, and that opportunities come to you rather than only being found when you're desperate. This isn't personal branding for its own sake. It's the infrastructure that makes optionality possible. Optionality in compensation comes from optionality in the market, and optionality requires visibility. The first concrete action: benchmark your actual market value this week. Not a salary survey, not a LinkedIn statistic. Run a real job search. Find 3 to 5 roles comparable to yours in terms of level, skills required, and location. Look at what they're actually paying. If the numbers are significantly above your current salary, you now have real data. If they're roughly aligned, you have useful calibration. Either way, you've moved from guessing to knowing. Most people have never done this. They have a vague sense they might be underpaid, but no concrete evidence. Concrete evidence changes how you carry yourself in every compensation conversation that follows. The second action: identify which of the 3 mechanisms fits your situation. Outside offer, role change, or skill scarcity. Think about where you are right now. Are you in a deep candidate pool where outside offers are easy to generate, but you haven't been in the market recently? That's your lever. Are your skills at the top of the current band with no obvious path to the next one? A role change, internal or external, is probably the move. Or are you somewhere where a specific skill investment would genuinely differentiate you in a meaningful way? That's a longer game, but the highest yield one if you can identify the right capability. One mechanism, clearly identified, is worth more than 3 vague intentions. The third action, and the most important one, is to make this a habit rather than a crisis response. The people who solve salary stagnation permanently don't do it by finding one better-paying job and stopping. They solve it by changing how they relate to the labor market, participating continuously instead of engaging only when frustrated, maintaining an external identity year-round, not just when job hunting, running that one interview process annually regardless of how settled they feel. The reason most people end up in this situation in the first place is that they treated the market as something to engage with once every 5 years when desperate enough. The fix is structural, not episodic. The full article is at realsyllabus.com. It covers the pricing mechanics in more depth, including how the first offer you accept compounds through your career, how employer-perceived searchability works, and the exact sequence for generating a real outside offer without burning bridges. If you found this useful, there's a lot more in that format on the site. Real Syllabus publishes the operating knowledge that formal education never gave you: finance, careers, employment law, how organizations actually work. No trailhead recaps, no motivational takes. Just the honest version.